Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another broadcast by the New York Philharmonic, originating in Philharmonic Hall at Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts in New York City. This is your commentator, Milton Cross, back once again to tell you about this week's program of music, which it will be our pleasure to bring you during the next 2 hours. We are happy this week to welcome back to the podium here at Philharmonic Hall the orchestra's distinguished music director, Leonard Bernstein. Mr. Bernstein has chosen 2 works for this broadcast, the premiere of Phorion by Lukas Foss, and after our regular intermission period, the monumental Symphony No. 6 in A minor, subtitled The Tragic, by that great Austrian master, Gustav Mahler, a work, incidentally, that takes almost an hour and a quarter to perform. Before we begin this week's New York Philharmonic broadcast, let us pause 90 seconds for this message. This is the New York Philharmonic Radio Network. This week, our New York Philharmonic broadcast will open with a work commissioned by the Association of Women's Committees for Symphony Orchestras. It is Lukas Foss's Phorion, begun during the summer of 1966 and completed only a short while ago. I think it would be appropriate if I quote from the program notes what the composer has to say about his latest composition. Phorion is the Greek word for stolen goods. The idea for this composition came to me one summer night in 1966 while asleep. In my dream, I heard or saw torrents of Baroque 16th notes washed ashore by ocean waves, sucked in again, returning ad infinitum. This rather basic dream vision only began to interest me when, upon awakening, the technical realization of my dream suddenly became clear to me in terms of a composition. I decided to use, borrow, or steal the prelude from the solo violin partita in E by Bach. I also decided to use normal strings, electronic organ, an electronically amplified harpsichord or electric piano, and an amplified harp or electric guitar. Here is Leonard Bernstein coming on stage. In just a moment, you will hear the world broadcast premiere of Phorion by Lukas Foss, played by the New York Philharmonic under Mr. Bernstein's direction. You have been listening to a new work commissioned by the Association of Women's Committee for Symphony Orchestras for performance on this week's program by the orchestra under Leonard Bernstein. It was Phorion, Phorion, Phorion by Lukas Foss. And as I mentioned earlier, the title comes from the Greek word for stolen goods. And so we come to intermission time here on our concert. Before I bring your intermission host to the microphone, let us pause 1 minute for this message. This is the New York Philharmonic Radio Network.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. It's not an easy assignment to speak about the work that you have just heard, which is my own, but I shall try. Fortunately, I have with me a fellow composer for moral support. Not only is Mr. Stanley Silverman a composer, but he also joined the New York Philharmonic in this instance to play the complex electric guitar part. So he can discuss the piece with me from the orchestra's point of view and from the composer's point of view. Stanley, are you angry at me for roping you into this affair?
Well, it's always pleasing in terms of practicing to work on Bach as well as Foss, but I must say that the Bach puts you in perfect frame technically for whatever's thrown at you, including Foss. And first thing I would like to ask you, and the orchestra would like to know this too, what does Phorion mean?
Phorion is Greek for stolen goods. And that is what I did. I stole Bach. Now, to those in the audience who may think that that is not compatible with the idea of a creative composer to steal, let me remind those of T.S. Eliot's famous words, "Bad poets imitate, good poets steal." So that we are living in a century in which stealing has long been an accepted procedure. Not the only one, to be sure, because actually when you steal, you have to prove that you had a right to steal by making it your own. In other words, you have to turn this thing, in this case Bach's prelude for violin from the partita in E, you have to turn this into something else. And you have to somehow at the same time justify the procedure of using that. So you're not really making it easier for yourself by stealing. You have to answer even more questions when put on trial.
Yes, but why would this be a composition as opposed to extended arrangements of Bach? For instance, I recall the Busoni arrangements of Bach keyboard work, or Segovias for the guitar, which in fact add bass lines and various counter lines, and yet they would call that arrangements.
Well, an arrangement is an entirely different thing. An arrangement is usually it comes about in the following manner. A performer would like to play a certain piece that isn't written for his instrument. So he arranges it so he may have a chance to play it. It's a very modest and beautiful thing, and many arrangements, of course, are totally uncalled for because the original version is usually the best. I would say arranging is a very dubious thing, whereas what I did is also perhaps a dubious thing, but for totally different reasons. You see, let me tell you a little bit the history behind this idea. My last composition was a cello concerto for the incredible virtuoso Rostropovich, the Russian cellist. He wanted a piece from me, and he plays the saraband of Bach for solo cello in almost as an encore for almost every recital. So when I got to my fourth movement in the cello concerto, I decided to use that saraband. But I did something very different to it. I used it partly as a row and partly quite literally. I started out, you might say, like a theme and variations. It was my theme. And the theme began to bleed, you might almost say. And then suddenly there was only a 10-note row left from the saraband on which the rest of the movement was based. That is a much more legitimate and familiar way of using a composer. You might almost say it's the idea of a theme and variations. But while at work on the concerto, I remember sleeping one night and dreaming that I was at the ocean and that the waves washed ashore millions of 16th notes, Baroque 16th notes. And then I woke up and I thought what a wonderful piece that would be. But then I forgot it because I don't believe in dreams as sources for inspiration. And then suddenly it occurred to me, wouldn't it be marvelous if one could translate this in symphonic terms, namely by having the orchestra, different groups from the orchestra, different groups of instruments, emerge out of nothing, emerge as waves emerge. That means that they would have to play inaudibly. And as the conductor calls upon them with a special gesture, they would emerge. In other words, they wouldn't start at a special place in the music, but they would emerge because they've been playing all the time, only they've been playing inaudibly. I got very intrigued with this idea and decided that that would be my next piece. Along came a commission from the very wonderful Association of Women's Committee for Symphony Orchestras, and I was elected to write a piece which was to be premiered by the New York Philharmonic. And I just decided it had to be this piece and that I had to write it immediately. What you have here is a piece that isn't really a piece. You have these 16 notes being washed ashore. You have him standing there calling upon different groups of instruments, not knowing himself where they have arrived within the Bach work when he calls upon them to emerge. Chance music, that is aleatoric music, to the extent that the conductor himself doesn't know what will emerge, but he knows it will be somewhere from that Bach piece. And he knows it will be in a certain rhythm. Different instruments have a different speed. He knows which instruments he's bringing in, so he will know the speed. But he will not know the pitch because he doesn't know where they have arrived at that point.
Well, may I ask you something, now that you've hit on the question of aleatoric music, and especially in this particular piece, wouldn't it be possible to make a definitive version, one that would be safe for the orchestra to play?
Yes, of course it would be, but then you see you lose the excitement of the emerging.
Because as a player in this particular piece, there is one thing that I feel that some of my comrades are having difficulty with. It's the score is laid out in front of you. You have the part, and then you have an explanation sheet. And then with the third eye, you're supposed to look for the cues. Now, I noticed that some of the players do jot in various versions that they should play. Therefore, is that against what you had in mind for the piece? I mean, is that allowed?
Well,
In other words, may I just elaborate for one moment? They are perhaps treating the piece in an aleatoric sense, but they are locking it in for this particular performance.
Well, you, Stanley, have a solo part, so you can jot in whatever you want. You can make decisions beforehand. But the violins who play in a group, or the violas, or the cellos who play in a group, obviously the individuals cannot make any decisions. They would have to have a meeting first and decide, let's start from number so-and-so. For instance, the concertmaster said to me, at this point, we're playing inaudibly for so long. It is so dangerous. Suddenly to emerge, we may be in different places. But I can only shrug my shoulders because I don't know what to do. It would be against the whole spirit of this particular adventure, against the rules of the game, as it were they to suddenly emerge at a different place. What kind of emerging is that?
Well, I must say that a very marvelous accident happened the other day, and if you leave the players to their own ingenuity, they do come up with some, I think, excellent things. For instance, at one place, they had not been brought in for maybe a minute, and they turned around and the concertmaster yelled, E. And they all came in at letter E together, and it was exactly the effect you wanted, yet
they really emerged on
yes,
E.
They were able to save themselves at that moment.
Well, my hope is that the tasks called for in this piece, which are frankly impossible right now, will eventually become not only possible, but even easy.
Yes.
And then we will have the kind of relaxed, marvelous performance that perhaps will take years in achieving.
Yes.
Meanwhile, I am bowled over, simply overwhelmed by the fact that it can be performed so effortlessly at this point.
Well, one thing I would like to say that helps in that matter is that besides the fact that you're dealing with a virtuoso orchestra, the string players have played this piece from childhood, and I noticed that the first rehearsal, the minute the downbeat came down, all these players had it in their fingers. And
yes, but does
did you
that make
count
it
on that?
easier or harder when they suddenly have to play it in 6/8, when they suddenly have to vanish and then emerge? Does it make it easier or does it make it harder?
Well, did you count, let me ask you this, did you count on this? Because I noticed that the fact that they have it in their fingers, it makes it a little easier for them to transpose
Well,
it
of
to
course. Why
various
did I
rhythms.
give it to them in E major? Naturally, I counted on that.
Yes.
It is really a concerto for all the violins, isn't it?
Yes, it certainly is, and that's the great difficulty, of course, for the rock and roll group, which I'm in. We have electric piano, electric organ, and electric guitar, is that we play it in either different keys or different note values. May I break for one moment? Let us pause 1 minute for a message from your local station. This is the New York Philharmonic Radio Network. Getting back to this interview with Lukas Foss about Phorion, I would like to ask you, this is getting into the piece again, well, what part of Phorion is Foss? I mean, the notes, a great many of the notes are Bach, yet there are some moments there that really don't seem to come entirely from Bach.
You know, it's funny. When I wrote traditional music, I was sometimes worried about the recognizability of my style. Is it really Foss? Now that I am doing work that would be termed by some avant-garde, I hate the military term, don't you? But there's no other, or others would call it experimental music maybe. Now that I'm doing that, the whole business of is it Foss, is it me, falls by the wayside. There is a marvelous new excitement about working for a cause, on a project, and what it actually is almost, if it's not me, maybe it's better, you know? I mean, there's a new unselfishness, you might say, and a lack of narcissism that comes into composition. And I'm sure you felt that in your own work, when you know exactly what you would like to do, and it only matters that you carry this vision out, and whether the result then, how it fits into the gesammelte Werke of Lukas Foss, I couldn't care less. You are almost freed of that whole issue suddenly, because you make yourself an instrument to discover something. In this case, the discovery is the fulfillment of this vision, this dream vision, these ocean waves bringing 16th notes, washing them ashore.
One question I would like to ask you is that it uses the full orchestra, your piece, except for the basses. Now, why is this? Is this because the basic piece is, in fact, a treble piece?
That's it. It's a treble piece, and I didn't know what to do with the basses. And when I don't know what to do with an instrument, I don't write for it. We've gotten away in new music from the idea of the Viennese orchestration. I use all my instruments only where I can use them. My scores don't first put all the instruments down and then I fill in the score. Rather, I write in where I need something and discover, as I write the piece, what instruments I need. For instance, I needed 3 horns. They have to imitate the violas in certain very carefully prescribed ways. Mocking tasks, you might say. In the same way, the saxophone imitates the violins. The percussion instruments even have Bach sheets in front of them and watch their particular violin part or viola part, whichever they are, allied to. And their tasks are derived from a knowledge of the sheet that contains Bach's note and from watching carefully to what is happening in their particular group of violins or violas or cellos. So that it's very much it's a whole new way of making music.
Yes.
You might say it's more like chamber music. And the conductor is very powerful because the timing is entirely in his hand. And there I must tell you what I just said to Leonard Bernstein in the artist room, because I was fortunate enough to fly down for the dress rehearsal. I said to him, my only worry is that your performance isn't boring enough. By that I meant that he would get all the tasks done so efficiently, so expertly, one after the other, that there are not these endless moments of ocean waves, that where nothing happens. which actually were built into the piece. It is a piece where for long periods of time I was hoping that nothing would happen but this ball game of ocean waves coming in with little snatches of Bach.
Yes. Well, there was one other question that was very interesting. If one could say that your chamberwork echoey ended with a garbage can being hit, the rim of a garbage can, Phorion seems to begin with broken bottles. Do I hear correctly? Is that?
Yes, that is, you see, although it begins quite literally with the Bach, I felt that right from the first moment you have to show that something is going to go wrong. So the broken bottle seems to almost symbolically and audially set the pace for the whole piece.
And one last question. I read that your next piece is going to be, in fact, an extension of Phorion. Is this correct? Will it have the same instruments?
No, what instrument? Well, it will be for symphony orchestra, but I am sure it will have a different color because I will use different pieces. But I continue, indeed, I'm adding several movements to this work in which other forms of theft are explored. Other things will be done, not the same thing. Now, I'm not extending this piece. I'm adding other movements with other technical ideas and other ideas of, you might say, deterioration to a given entity which is borrowed from the past.
Well, thank you. It was very interesting talking to you.
Can I just say one more thing, and that is how thrilled I am with the performance of this orchestra. And I want to say this because it comes from the heart and because I knew what was demanded of the players, and that an orchestra which is trained to play audibly would be so serious and so obliging about playing inaudibly and would conquer so much ground in so short a time, within 1 week. Learn this piece, I thought for sure we'd be heading for a cancellation. And I'm overwhelmed that this didn't happen. I think Mr. Bernstein and the orchestra cannot be thanked enough. Stanley Silverman, I can't thank you enough for doing this interview with me. And now I return you to Milton Cross and after that to the glorious, huge, enormous, incredible Mahler Sixth Symphony.
Thank you. Before we resume our concert by the New York Philharmonic, let us pause 1 minute and 15 seconds for station identification and a message. This is the New York Philharmonic Radio Network.